Yo, Harsh, how you doing?
I'm good, Pete. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, man. I just finished my second iced coffee this morning, so I'm ready to rock.
Awesome. Yeah, and happy
Although
Friday.
yeah, totally back at you, man. I'm here on the West Coast though, since you're in Toronto, so like, hopefully you're not drinking any coffee right now, or else you're like, you're gonna be up all night long. But
Yep.
hey, everyone, thanks for joining us. We're gonna get started here in a second. I'm super pumped to have Harsh here today. I'm really excited to talk. Community centric go to markets, open source go to markets. Selling bottoms up and selling to the DevOps customer, along with like whatever other topics that people bring up. But before we get jamming here, Harsh, while people are kind of like making their way into the Zoom room here, any big plans this weekend with the fam? Got anything going on in Toronto?
Just dinner with the family tonight, and tomorrow maybe we'll go to the museum. My older kid, Liam, he's 3.5, so he's in the dinosaur phase. So he loves seeing
Oh,
dinosaurs. So we're gonna take him to the Royal Ontario Museum. That's about it.
that sounds awesome. What's Liam's favorite dinosaur right now?
He loves the T-Rex.
Oh, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, that's his favorite. Yep.
That's his favorite. I think
Yeah.
sounds like you and I are going to be having very similar weekends. I'm going to be taking my son, Michael, he's 5,
Yeah.
to the De Young Museum in San Francisco.
Nice.
There is a Egyptian mummy thing, so we're going to be
Oh,
going and checking that out. Awesome.
very nice.
Well, really stoked to have everyone joining us today. Just we're gonna get started here. Just kind of refresh everybody's memory on Power Hour. The idea behind Power Hour is to be as interactive as possible. If you have questions, Harsh and I are here to answer them. A bunch of questions were submitted ahead of time as well, which is fantastic. But you're going to hear a little bit about Harsh's background, what he's been up to, and you'll be able to ask him and myself questions around kind of like your biggest go-to-market, sales operations, sales strategy, sales management, leadership questions there. So for those who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related disciplines. And so the community's mission is pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 27,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own. Sound familiar? Help them see around corners they may not be familiar with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the way that we do that is through great live sessions like what you're about to experience today, through our robust online forum and in-person events. And for those who weren't previously admitted, we're going to go ahead and add you to the community here. So before we get started, just a couple of reminders for folks. Power Hour is kind of a unique format. There's not really a specific piece of content we're going to be talking through. We're here to ask questions and get answers from Harsh and myself, and so please do ask those questions. Use the chat, use the Q&A tab. All the options work. And so with that, let's go ahead and head into some introductions here. I think that'll be fun. I'll go first. I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm the founder of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales managers and leaders use metrics to improve the performance of reps, their teams, etc. I'm also the founder of Modern Sales Pros, and prior to this, I started a software company called Talent Bin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales. So that's a little bit, as you can tell, think about sales just a bit here and there. And Harsh, I would love for you to kind of give folks a little bit of context on yourself, maybe kind of walk them through some of the different sales motions that you've worked on, who the buyers have been, et cetera, just so people can kind of understand like, oh, okay, cool. Like these are the muscles Harsh has, and I can kind of ask questions around that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so let's give a quick background. My name is Harsh Sabikhi. I've been in the software space now for 20 years. I've had a unique journey. I actually started off as a software developer for Texas
Yeah.
Instruments. And then from there, I transitioned into a company called MKS, which was purchased by PTC. And really, my career has followed the evolution of the software development lifecycle. So from 2008 to 2012, I was selling waterfall application lifecycle management software. Then from 2012 to 2015, I was at Rally, where I was selling agile lifecycle management software. Yep. And then, with GitHub, I made my transition from agile to the DevOps space, and then from GitHub to HashiCorp, and now here at Octopus, continuing that journey. So it's funny how my career has followed companies that have also been changing their methodology from waterfall to agile to DevOps. Yeah. And, from a sales methodology perspective, I've practiced all of them. I would say most recently, I'm a huge believer in the value framework by Force Management, and we apply METPIC to a lot of our opportunity management.
Nice. And so did you guys do Force Management at GitHub or Pendo or HashiCorp, or was it an Octopus Deploy thing, or what?
No, we did it at Pendo, and I plan on introducing it to Octopus.
Nice. Did you sell at PTC, or were you still an engineer at that point?
No, I was for the first 2 years. I was there for 4 years. The first 2 years, I was a sales engineer, and then the last 2 years, yes, I was selling at PTC.
There you go, PTC diaspora.
Yeah.
Old
school.
I was gonna say, I think I have a copy of like the qualified sales leader around here. Around here somewhere. I actually had a really fun fireside chat with John McMahon. God, when was that? Like maybe a month ago or so. And we gave away copies of the qualified sales leader. Awesome. Well, So again, folks, like, please do ask your the pertinent questions and what have you. One thing that, like, one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time, because you've been selling to technical audiences for like a hot second now, and then you jumped over to Pendo, right?
Yes.
Which is not selling to a technical audience, but instead selling to like quasi-technical, like product or what have you. What was like the biggest change when going from like selling to VPEs or directors of like, or like DevOps folks or what have you, to selling to a product audience?
Yeah, product audience, customers, CS leaders and product management, they care a lot more about the customer experience and about the tangible business value that your software will be providing, and they're also looking for turnkey solutions, right? They're not going to be investing in software that requires a heavy lift and implementation. They buy a piece of software and then 90 days later it's in production. No, they buy a piece of software, they want it running tomorrow.
Now, please.
Yeah, and I think they're a lot more data driven. See, because selling to a DevOps buyer, they're used to building, right, versus buying. The audience at Pendo was a lot more from a buying perspective, but then also relying on the data the systems give, so then they can make the more data informed decisions.
Yeah. Well, one thing that that's like fascinating to me about the emerging kind of like I don't know, product enablement space, or like, I don't know what you would call it, is that selling to buyers who have historically like not had things to buy can be you know where I'm going. You're like chuckling, right? You're like and like it has a lot of implications, right? It has implications around like, hey, this budget doesn't exist, right? Or it has implications around like, hey, we don't know like how to buy shit. Like, it's kind of like somebody like going to like a singles bar or whatever, and like doesn't know how to like hit on people or like get hit on, right? And so like, for folks who are in our audience, what are some of the recommendations you might have around kind of contending with like situations like that, where you have buyers who haven't historically bought things and are now like having to buy things for the first time?
Yeah, really good question. And our answer at Pendo was amazing. What we did was we actually had a value team. They were called value consultants. And
interesting.
During the proof of concept or proof of value, when we were doing the trials, we'd actually start bringing them in to showcase, okay, here are the use cases the customer ABC has, and here's the tangible benefits. The value consultants would actually work with our economic buyers to help build the business case, so that
manufacture budget, right?
That's right.
Got it.
That's exactly
So,
it. Yeah.
so it's almost just like a situation where, like the example, like Atrium's in a similar situation right now where we're creating a new category of software. And so you have it, it's different if I have a bunch of people who were like sales leaders at like Greenhouse or sales leaders at like Lever or whatever. And it's like, the example I always use is it's really easy to, sorry, it's not really easy. Sales is always a pain in the ass, but like it's easier. It's one thing if you're showing up and you're like, cool, job bite sucks, right? They're like, yeah, job bite sucks. It's like, cool, well, would you like to buy Lever? It's way doper. And it's like, oh, well, how is it doper? In these ways right here.
Right.
Oh, you're right. It is way cooler. We're gonna switch like this 20K to your 20K. Versus like, hey, you're not doing this thing right now that you ought, like you have a gap in your business process right now that is missing, and like these are the negative implications associated with that. And like if there was a better future state, I'm doing my best force management for you right now. If there is a better future state that I can delineate for you, that would have these positive impacts, then things would be good. Great, let's go arm in arm together and like manufacture that budget together. And this is something that I coach my reps on all the time. When people are like, oh, there's no budget, it's like, look, until there's no money in the bank, there's budget. You just have to manufacture it, right?
Exactly.
And so it sounds like what you guys did was you said, hey, we're always going to run into this situation. So you know what? We might as well just like solve it up front, like every time. And so it sounds like it was just part of the sales motion to say like, hey, we're going to build this case as we're selling. And then like, if for whatever reason, like magically budget exists or whatever, then like we already have this business case, but probably what's going to happen, let's not get surprised. And like, let's have this weapon at our disposal. And did that really like positively impact your win rates and deal cycles after you guys adopted that?
It absolutely did, because we framed the value consultant's role to work with our economic buyer around not just what Pendo is solving for, but the positive business outcomes that Pendo is going to be giving to the customer. Could be, reducing support calls or improving the customer experience. Because I can tell you, those types of initiatives are budgeted in companies. So
exactly,
the value
it just doesn't have software tied to it yet.
No, exactly. And quite frankly, at that CXO level, they don't care which software helps them solve that initiative.
Solve
they
this
just
problem.
want to achieve it. Exactly. That's exactly it, right?
Right.
Customer experience.
What does John McMahon call that? The pain above the noise?
Yes. Yeah. The pain. And the other area, though, is really important about that is making sure that you're not talking about your product. That you're talking the customer speak and what they care about. And ideally, you have figured out exactly what the strategic initiatives are that the company cares about for that fiscal year, and you're tying your softwares to that.
Which is great when you have a situation like Atrium has a similar situation, right? Where like, I mean, Pendo is I mean, it's like an emerging product cloud, et cetera. But like a non-trivial component of it is analytics. Obviously, there's like queues and walkthroughs and so on and so forth. But what you can do is you can kind of like tie the subset of features to that like business pain. Like we have this similar situation where Atrium takes like 3 minutes to set up, and so oftentimes what ends up happening is like a sales manager, an SDR manager, like SDR leader, or what have you, will come in and just like turn on an Atrium account. But then if they want to transact and buy that, oftentimes that might involve a higher up or what have you. And so identifying that use case that really matters, like, oh yeah, we're going to be doubling the size of our sales organization in the coming 12 months, and as a result, being able to minutely measure the ramp, the successful or unsuccessful ramp of our AEs or SDRs, and get ahead of situations when someone's tripping up. That's a really important thing for us. Great, like that's a CFO initiative, right? Or CEO CFO initiative, where it's like, hey, we're doubling our team. If our reps don't hit these ramp milestones, everyone's going to be really, really sad. Great, we should probably measure that. How are we going to measure that? Oh, Atrium. Right. Or like, hey, we're getting eaten alive by support costs right now. Largely the reason why we're getting eaten alive by support costs is because of like bad UX or like, sharp edges in the product. Let's use Pendo to figure out where those sharp edges are, right? Or use like walkthroughs in order to like train people. Oh, that's going to reduce our support costs versus like, hey, would you like some product analytics?
Yep, exactly. And you utilize the data to first understand the problem and understand the severity of that problem. There was this financial services company that purchased Pendo, and what they noticed was 56% of the times people were calling in for support was for three particular reasons, and the answers to those reasons was already on the website. It just was a
Of course.
poor UI design. So
Yep.
what did they do? They just created a simple little walkthrough to help people navigate to those sections of the website. So they got the answers. And then they implemented Pendo, and in 6 months, they had a $2 million savings.
Love it.
Yeah.
Nice little customer story there, Harsh. Very impressive.
Yeah.
This is what we want to. This is what we want our reps to do, right?
Yeah.
Like identify pain in the world. Yeah, you know what? That reminds me of this other
Yes.
proven use case right here. I can't tell you exactly the customer's name, but
Right.
it rhymes with Domino's pizza. And
That's funny.
and I love it. So one of the ways that we approach the problem that you're describing, because like what we'll do is our account executives will like do discovery. They'll figure out like what's going on in an organization. They'll get somebody's Atrium account set up, and then what we use in order to build that case is we actually use mutual plan software, which I think is like the old school version, or like the old school phrase for this is mutual planning software. The new school version of it is like, I don't know, like collaborative selling, or like collaborative like workspace or what have you. We use a product called Accord that we really like. One of our account executives, who's now a sales manager here, was like took that on as like an initiative that he wanted to do, because we used to use this like terrible PowerPoint template that I could call it terrible because I made it, and to like put the proof points together there, but it was pretty jank. How did you guys go about kind of packaging that up as like a given like pilot or like conversation progressing, so you could then like showcase that to people?
Yeah, very similar. We would do a mutual action plan with key milestones and get the customers buy-in on that. In fact, we would send out a draft and then schedule a meeting with the prospect to say, okay, we're here at this point. Here are all the other steps that we think are required for us to get to your go live date. Now let's work backwards, right? You're essentially doing a reverse close plan with the customer, and then give the customer the opportunity to modify it. And then this was also a really good opportunity for us, Pete, to understand who else needs to be involved in the buying process and in the decision-making process. So we use that. We didn't use anything fancy like that. We just put together like a Google slide deck. Yeah, exactly. Of all the different milestones and the owners. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think one of the things that you want to do is like, you don't want to get too constrained, and this is why I think some of the more modern versions of this, like Accord and like Recapped and what have you, make it so you can be like really, you want to be able to like be really visual, because like sometimes you'll have like proof point. Like I'll give you an example with us, right? Like usually very quickly after somebody has turned on an Atrium account, there's usually like a glaring issue on someone's team. It's like, hey, this rep right here, and also that the software actually just automatically detects like this rep right here has a substantial problem with respect to his win rate, and the reason why his win rate is problematic in that regard is because his conversion rate out of proposal is way off as compared to all the other reps. Great. Like, and so what you want to do is you want to like screenshot that bad boy, right? And then especially the resolution of that, like, oh, like this rep right here has like massive pipeline hygiene problems. He's got 30 untouched ops. Oh, damn, that's terrible. Cool, go manage that. And then you see the untouched op count decline. And now you've got a before state and after state. You package that up into a little baby case study right there, and like, boom, cool. Would you like to do this across the entire organization? Yeah. This is why I like slide decks for this use case, or at least like the old school version. But because I think like being like visual is like really powerful, especially with being visual is powerful for people who are like non-technical, like numbers-based buyers who are like more emotive, which is like sales managers, sales leaders, etc., are more right brain, with the exception of you, Mr. Electrical Engineer. But that's something that we've found. I imagine that like selling to technical audiences is a little bit different there, and like that's actually been more your background there. How do you like when you were at HashiCorp and when you're at GitHub and what have you? I imagine with Octopus Deploy, it's kind of a similar situation. How does that approach change?
The biggest change is you have to take both a bottom up and a top down approach. The
Interesting.
bottom up approach is needed because you have to get to a state pretty quickly that, from a technical perspective, that your software is going to work and help solve the DevOps engineer, the release managers, the site reliability engineers job. So that's the bottom up approach. So make sure that, okay, the technology works and it's good. At the same time, in parallel, it's the job of the account executive and the sales leader to make sure they're taking a top-down approach as well, highlighting to the VPs and directors that, hey, we're in an active POC with your teams. Here's what we're helping to prove out. Here's what we think your problem is today. Here's what we think we know you want to get to, and here's how we're going to get there. And then pepper them with, like, case studies and use cases and how we've helped other organizations. So when it comes time to closing off the POC, presenting to senior management, they've already heard of us. They know, okay, this is coming down the pipe, and then hopefully that we get a positive result from that, and then the budget's approved, and then we get into the negotiation. That's the biggest change, because when you're selling a Pendo, you don't have to sell to the admins, right? Because it's not something that is difficult to stand up, right? It's a SaaS solution, whereas Octopus and HashiCorp, it is complex. You have to understand and at Octopus, you have to understand the deployment process. They're trying to deploy containers or Kubernetes, or they're trying to deploy .NET applications, and what is the workflow and all the permissions that they need for that, right? So that's why you have to take both approaches.
Interesting. And I think this is where a lot of organizations kind of get tripped up, is because, and I think actually you could make the argument that we're guilty of this a little bit, or at least maybe a year ago, we were a little bit guilty of this, which was like, you can transact small down low.
Yes.
And I think that open source software is a good example of this, where the transaction down low oftentimes is just free, right?
Yeah.
Like whether it's a community edition or express edition or just OSS or what have you.
Yes.
But maybe it's not free, right? Like maybe it's Datadog, maybe it's New Relic or whatever. And you're in the organization at $199 a month or $299 a month or what have you. But I think the thing that oftentimes folks can get, and this is I think a little bit of confusion around what PLG or product-led sales or what have you, you can't declare victory at that point, right?
No.
The same way that pure self-serve products GitHub or Dropbox
Monday.com,
or Slack, Monday.com, exactly. You might make the argument that Dropbox never achieved the state, it's full eventual potential, because they perceived that it could be self-serve forever, right? But then similarly, I think you can't the perception that transacting small, even if it's sales assisted, like the Datadog or a New Relic or fill in the blank, you're actually not at the actual finish line. It's almost you just passed the 25-yard line, right? There's money flowing, which is cool, because then there's skin in the game or whatever. But if you tell yourself a story that you're done at that point, then you're in for a pretty negative churn experience, or you're very susceptible to being displaced by a potential competitor or what have you. Has that kind of been your experience in kind of what you're what's selling to technical audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we make sure that we have a strong land and expand motion. To me, the first 25, 50K you sell into the account, maybe you sold into one particular division within one line of business. That's just the beginning of your journey. Now, your goal, along with the CSM and the potentially a TAM, if you're selling a TAM into the account, their job is to make sure that the customer gets into production as soon as possible. And then we get some quick wins for that customer. And then we evangelize and utilize that and try to sell across other lines of businesses. If it's a big enough account, I also am a huge advocate of account-based marketing. So getting your marketing to come in.
Interesting.
But
post-transaction. It's land. It's land and expand ABM.
Basically,
whatever that acronym would be.
Yeah, exactly.
Say more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so there's you got to look at the Fortune, the Global 2000s, right? The Fortune 500 companies. oftentimes in my career, I've gotten in with 100K, 200K initial deal, but to expand that to 1 million within 24 to 36 months, you have to have a strong ABM motion, and then also start to build multiple champions across multiple lines of businesses. And some of the motions that we do there is the office hours, the lunch and learns, but then also sponsoring their internal tech days or doing a joint webinar with the customer on their success stories, inviting them to your conferences and having them speak at your events, and really crossing that boundary of becoming just a vendor and to a partner. And I think that's the key. That ABM motion is really good for organizations that, like in Amazon, for example. Amazon's not one company. Amazon is 300 mid-market companies.
Totally.
The way they operate, right? And there at Amazon, what's amazing is a director level has a $250,000 signing authority. He or she can make a product decision for their line of business, right? And so it's good and bad. The bad part is you then have to have a solid expansion motion.
It's good because you can transact. Bad because it's capped, right?
It's capped because you can't, just because you sold to Amazon Echo does not mean now you're going to get the Amazon Music folks. They have a different stack.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I totally get that. And we see that at Atrium as well, at a smaller scale, where we'll start with a given part of the organization. Oftentimes, like whether it's like the SMB AE team or like maybe it's the SDR team, or fill in the blank, and then a really important thing is for us to like, we call it the next commercial action in the account. Like we literally have in our close one notes, we have in our close one notes template, we have a section that says next commercial action or next intended commercial action. And account executives are supposed to declare that. So they close win XYZ, they characterize the next commercial action. And then more importantly, or not more importantly, but also importantly, they actually create an expansion op for that, right? And the reason why, and like I think you'll appreciate this as somebody who like worked for Rally Software and what have you, is oftentimes what people don't, AEs and sales managers don't necessarily understand kind of like what the purpose of an opportunity is, and really what it is. It's like it's the signification of a unit of work. It's like a to-do. It's very large to-do, right? Whether there's, it's not the same sort of to-do as like, a little bug ticket in Jira or GitHub issues or whatever. It's more like an epic, I suppose. But if you have an intention of like saying, hey, you know what, I'll use Pendo as an example. They're a customer of ours. Like we're, working with the SDR team, but then there's like a secondary, there's lots of other parts of the sales organization there, and so there's an open expansion up that's like targeted for that. It's associated with the account executive is working that up. It actually shows up. We actually have two separate pipe reviews. We have a new business pipe review, and then we actually have an expansion pipe review, because what you don't want to do is you don't want like the new business, which is always like the shiny nickel, to crowd out the expansion. So literally what we did is we just unbundled them and made space on the calendar for both.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You said you're working with Pendo right now. They purchased Atrium.
Yeah, we're working with the SDR team there. Yeah, they're awesome.
Nice.
Cool. And so like, I think one thing that as we're talking about kind of like initial transactions and then kind of like expanding across organizations, I think one thing that you and I were talking about this about Octopus earlier, some organizations have these like really scaled like OSS editions or community editions or whatever that like creates a lot of inbound. I mean, HashiCorp's an insane example of this, right? Like what are the effective ways of kind of like finding the needles in the haystack and kind of like separating the wheat from the chaff when you have all that inbound, even if some of the inbound is like paying, right?
For sure. The best way is to see who's active in your community. So Octopus has a separate community set up. We've got our own community Slack channel, and we've got over 5,000 members now in our community Slack channel. So the first thing to do is look at, okay, who the community members are and which organization they belong to. And then we'll, cross-reference that with our Salesforce to see, are they a paying customer or not, or are they on the free one? Now, of course, we take into consideration, we're not going to just blast that customer, but what we're going to do, though, is we at least know that we have an in and they're utilizing our software to a degree. This gives our account executives a little bit more focus to go after certain accounts over others. And the reason for that is because an account executive typically will have 40, 50 accounts. They got to prioritize it. And the way we prioritize it, we look at which accounts are active on our website. We use things like Slintel and Sixth Sense and others. We'll also look at who's active in the community. And then in addition to that, who's downloading our white papers and joining our webinars. So
yeah. One thing that we really like to do, we don't have that problem because we don't we have a sales assist motion. We don't have like a self-serve piece. Like maybe eventually we'll get to like a full self-serve piece, but I think that you have to either have to have like a pretty simplistic value proposition, like Notion, and this. My simplistic. I'm not like diminishing these solutions or whatever. It's just like it's very straightforward, right? Like you download Zoom. How you're like, all right, here we go. We're gonna have a meeting, right?
That's right.
Or like you download Slack. We're like, hey, we're gonna like chat some people. Versus something that's like a little bit more sophisticated.
Yes.
So we have a sales assist motion where our account executives will meet with somebody. They'll set up their free Atrium account. They'll just kind of guide them through the setup process. Very data doggy in that regard. And then what does end up happening? So our account executives will have a dozen or like a dozen or so kind of like live accounts at any given point in time. It's very data doggy in this regard, insofar as it's like, hey, we're like actively evaluating this. We're going to work together and transact if there's like a solution here. And so, but even within that though, you want to like differentiate between people who like get it and like maybe people who are like tire kicking.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. And so one of the ways that we do this is we actually pipe a ton of product information into Salesforce. So I'm like the world's biggest homer of this this software called Census. It's like reverse ETL software that allows you to pipe essentially you pipe like calculations out of Redshift or Snowflake or whatever. Like it's kind of like headless BI, right? So you've got like different queries, like trailing 30 days page view on a per user basis, or like how many days active in trailing 30 days, and then you actually can decompose your product kind of based on different kind of pieces. But in a initial transaction, really what you just want to do is see like, okay, cool, like this person said that they were super juiced up on this, and like, are they actually using it? Are they in the 100%, right? And that's actually been really powerful, because it actually, I mean, as a seller too, it gives you like really good information. So when someone's like, oh yeah, I'm not so sure about this, et cetera, and then like you look at their usage and you're like, right, you're not so sure about it. Like you've had like 500 page views in the last in the last 2 days.
So on that note, though, you just give me an idea. What I recommend, Pete, is check out Pendo's product engagement score, because that was exactly that, where when we installed Pendo into a customer, and then we of course ran our own analytics and background, we knew that if a customer did these types of core events in the first 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, we knew that they would have a higher product engagement score. And the product engagement score is made up of 3 indices: stickiness, growth, and activity. And you can define, obviously every product is going to be different, but you define what those core events are. Like I think Slack has, and they're public about this, I think Slack is a person who creates a channel, person who messages the entire channel, a person who mentions people within the first 4 days will become a power user. So
I love it. Yeah, creates a channel kind of seems like a pretty, pretty critical like thing. Like that this person is going to be like, going to be super pumped on things there. And And like when you talk about, so we were kind of talking about like account executives prioritizing things. I wonder if there's also or like prioritizing within like 40 or 50 accounts or whatever. What about like even like up funnel from that, right? Like
Yeah.
the one, like how do you identify the the folks who have downloaded or what have you, that like maybe the SDR should be going after,
Yes.
or maybe even the account executives should be going after, right? Like
Yeah.
in between their customer facing meetings and what have you.
Yeah. To optimize everyone's time, what we do is if it's an existing customer and we get a
Yep.
pretty hot lead, I get the account executive to run with it right away. Let's not
Yep.
add the SDR as a layer. However, if it's a net new account and we don't have any interaction with that customer, then the SDR
Yep.
goes ahead and qualifies it. And then, of course, our marketing does a really good job in the top of the funnel to go ahead and prioritize those leads. So if it's someone coming in from an event and requested that they be contacted by our sales team, or they downloaded a white paper on how to utilize a Docker registry, we know that that's a really strong use case. It gives us that context, and then the SDRs or the account executive, depending on the account, will reach out with that contextual information.
Yeah. I think one thing that I learned from, I worked with a woman named Michelle Pietsch, who used to lead sales at Dooley, and before that she was at Drift, and before that she was at Datadog for quite some time, around kind of like the sales assist motion, because like I wanted coaching on it and kind of like learn from someone who's done it before. One thing that she kind of talked about, which I was like really impressed by, was this notion of like inbound to outbound, and one of the things, like, so what they would do is they would use an inbound action as a trigger to then go outbound in a very multi-threaded way.
Right.
And so the example here would be somebody like, and it could be any inbound gesture, right? Like somebody downloads a white paper, or it could be someone actually like installs Datadog, right? Or fill in the blank. And then if the account reaches relevant qualification criteria, so it's like worth the SDR, like calories, if you will, then they don't just go out and like attack that individual person, right? What they do, like they do that. Yeah, exactly. But then they like the thing with Datadog, at least, was they would then go outbound to at least 5 contacts, and so they knew, so like they jump over to Lead IQ or like Zoom Info or like Lusha or whatever, and they're like, then they go shopping for the humans that matter, or maybe the humans are already in the CRM or whatever, and then they fire off, like they drop those 4 people into a sequence right there. It's almost kind of like proprietary intent, right? So rather than like relying on like Bombora or like Zoom Info intent information or whatever, 6 Sense, blah, 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 it's actually like a little bit more. It's like, oh, well, this is real. They like downloaded that Kubernetes white paper, or they like actually installed the software. Are you guys, do you, how many SDRs do you guys have at Octopus?
We've got 3 SDRs.
Okay. You guys doing anything around that? Like that's not that's not a ton of SDRs yet.
No, not yet. No, we're going to be scaling that up pretty quickly. So it's funny you mentioned that. So we are actually in the middle of a trial, POC, with a large company, and this is where marketing helped quite a bit. So I can't name the company's name, but company A, and then they're a pretty big company. Marketing came to me this morning and said, hey, we actually noticed a lot of activity over the last 7 days from a subsidiary of that company A. So to your point, Pete, then what we did was, and then they shared with us the contacts that have been browsing our website and downloading and stuff like that. We then had the account executive go after that subsidiary, letting them know, hey, just so you know, we're engaged with your parent company and helping them with X, Y, and Z. So.
What tipped marketing off about that? Was that like 6 Sense or?
Yes, 6 Sense. And then when we had told them that we're talking to one of the biggest deals for the quarter could be this company, and then they're like, that name rings a bell, because when the people from that subsidiary signed on and downloaded, they actually used the parent company's email alias.
Got it.
So
So
that's how
this
we
is
made
just
the
a
coordination.
yeah. This is just like a. I think that's actually a really interesting example for smaller stage companies. This was just like good old fashioned like in a meeting together sort of situation, right? So like in a leadership meeting or whatever, and like
That's right.
or maybe this was like a forecast call, because if you were talking about the biggest, the biggest potential deals for the quarter or whatever. And I think what this potentially speaks to is the importance of making sure that marketing is involved in that, even if they're like, just listening with like one ear or whatever while like processing email or what have you, right?
Exactly. Yep. No, totally.
Nice. One of the things that I think, at least, and this might be the case with Octopus, but at GitHub and then also at HashiCorp, that was really important to your commercial motion, I think, was channel enablement. Maybe you can kind of like talk about that, because I think that like, in early stage organizations with higher ASP, usually like that's not gonna, relying on the channel to like do your first like few $1 million of sales is like probably not going to happen. But but if you've got like a low ASP, potentially have a low ASP product or what have you, adding that as like a booster rocket later on can be really powerful. Maybe you can kind of speak to that with respect to, with respect to GitHub or HashiCorp or what have you.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about it from the context of HashiCorp, because I think they've done channel really, really well. HashiCorp being, the on-ramp to the cloud, right? They've got the cloud operating model. Our entire pitch was we are vendor agnostic, cloud agnostic. So because of that, because HashiCorp allowed organizations to deploy infrastructure to any cloud provider, we made sure that our products were customers were able to purchase those products from the Azure Marketplace, GCP Marketplace, and AWS Marketplace. So that was one motion of it, to make sure that you can utilize those credits to burn down those credits and then purchase HashiCorp. That was one aspect of it. The other was, we realized a lot of these companies also try to streamline all of their procurements through a reseller. So we had a really good reseller motion there as well, where we had flow down terms we had agreements with the biggest reseller, SHI, SoftChoice, Insight, to make sure that if the customer did want to go down that route, we were able to easily transact there. And then the third partnership motion of HashiCorp was ISV partners, the better together story, right? The 1 + 1 = 3. So at HashiCorp, we had a really good relationship with GitHub and the likes of LaunchDarkly and others, because HashiCorp is taking all over the operations side, GitHub is helping from the dev side. So it's a really good handshake. And most organizations we're talking to, they have both systems anyways. So we worked with got the two sales teams connected, so they were able to strategize on a joint strategy together in those accounts.
I love it. Yeah. And actually, we have a pretty cool customer called Tackle that actually helps facilitate that selling on those marketplaces, because like at this point there's like kind of a lot.
There are 5,000 on each of those marketplaces, 5,000 ISPs.
The number of like hyperscaler marketplaces there are is like smaller. Like obviously AWS is a big one, but I imagine that Azure has
Azure's pretty big, and so is GCP.
Yeah, exactly. Like those are the three hyperscalers that matter, I think. And like each of them has a marketplace, but the problem is that like there's a lot of solutions on those marketplaces, right? It's kind of like the app, it's like Apple App Store or whatever, and so it's like insufficient to just kind of like mail it in or whatever. Like now you actually have to manage that in a meaningful fashion. So that's fascinating to hear. I mean, I imagine like 5 or 10 years ago, there was obviously like Datadog did a great job of like scaling up using the AWS marketplace. It sounds like HashiCorp and others did it as well. But now that's like every dog and pony, right? Every cat and dog is like hanging out on there. You got to do a better job of like rising above the noise there. I wonder if that means that there will be like you'll start seeing like channel managers show up earlier in the maturity model of an organization. Like you guys have 3 SDRs and
But
I
we
don't know,
do
what
have
is
a
that, like
strong
five
channel motion though, right? Yeah, to your point.
already?
Yeah, we already,
Yeah.
we already do. Yeah, yep. I've got someone that manages channels for North America, and then we've got someone that manages channels for EMEA. And the EMEA market is really unique, right, Pete? I don't know if you know this,
Mhm.
but in some countries, like you have to partner with a handful of vendors because they hold contracts to the largest companies
Oh
in that
yeah.
country, so you can
Yeah.
only sell through them. So
Dude, totally. I was at this battery ventures sales summit on golly gee, when was it? Oh, Wednesday.
mhm.
And there's this really great panel. So it's oh, actually you probably know Bill Binch because he was at
Oh yeah, Bill.
Pendo
Yeah,
at one point.
he was the
Yeah,
CRO. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
He
So
actually hired me at the small one.
nice.
Yeah,
He's got good taste.
yeah.
Yeah, so Bill is now over at
Battery.
Battery,
He's operating. Yeah,
right?
operating
Yeah,
partner.
and so he and his team were the ones who were like the lead dogs on putting together this sales summit, which was like really well done. They kicked
Yeah,
ass. It was like it
yeah.
was really nice, but the content was fantastic. And one of the
Right.
sessions was Abe, I want to say Smith from Zoom, the head of international at Zoom, and then this woman whose name is escaping me right now, or sorry, her name was Genevieve. I forget her last name,
Mhm.
but she was like very senior at Salesforce for a long time, but like doing a bunch of international stuff. And they were talking about they were talking about like international go to market and like kind of the challenges associated
Yes.
with it and what have you. They actually recommended, so if anybody who's with us right now is interested in international stuff, they did there's a book that they recommended called like Global Class, I want to
Mhm.
say. I just like bought a copy of it, but yeah, like talked about how
Yeah.
when you're going to market internationally, oftentimes like I think the international go to market international like buying behavior, like
Yes.
technology adoption behavior or buying behavior is anywhere between like 10 to 20, maybe even 30 years behind the United States. Like the United
Yeah.
States
Some
is
markets,
just
yes.
yeah, totally
Brazil
right.
and Japan, that's 100% true. And those markets, like you simply can't sell in Brazil or Japan if you don't have a strong channel motion.
Yeah, they're like, who are you? Get out of here,
That's
Harsh.
right.
Like, go
Yeah.
pound sand,
Yeah.
Pete. Like, I'm only going to do business with someone that I went to
That's
elementary
right.
school with, like literally.
Yes.
Um, and
Very true.
so if you don't partner with with those folks, um,
Yeah.
then you're gonna be grumpy like in a meaningful way. What is
Yeah.
like, I mean, so I think that's like a really fascinating thing, like in DevOps and kind of like technical
Hmm.
sales. It sounds like managing these marketplace channels and also potentially
Yep.
partnering with these like third parties in international scenarios is really important. What are some
Yeah.
other kind of like wrinkles of like a technical like DevOps sales motion that people should be
Yeah.
aware, especially like emergent ones,
For sure. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like managing these marketplaces is like an emergent challenge for
Yep.
these folks because like now there's a bajillion folks on those marketplaces. Like 5 years ago, that
Right.
wasn't the case. So it didn't really
That's right.
matter. You're like, the only one. So like, what are some emergent things that are showing up that people should be aware of?
Yeah. Is also it's especially in the DevOps space when you have a technical solution that requires some sort of implementation, and when you're small, you can't have a 30, 40 people in professional services, right? You've
Right.
got a handful. Is partnering with boutique SI companies, SI firms that
Mm,
will actually implement your product. So you go ahead and do the software transaction, and then you have a virtual bench where you do a statement of work with a customer, and then you outsource that to a third party. And then you need multiple boutique SIs across the globe because they themselves will do two things for you. Number one,
mm,
they'll actually spend the time and energy and the resources to get certified on your technology. So they can say,
yep.
like at a HashiCorp, we had a lot of boutique SIs across the world. They got Terraform certified, Vault and Console certified. We would
Yep.
pay for them to get certified. And then that way they were also more credible in front of their customers. So then when we sold a deal, they're like, great, now you want to get Vault up and running in 60 days. Here's boutique SI, X, Y, and Z. They're going to help you do this. Sometimes we would facilitate that introduction only and get out of the way. Other times the customer only wanted to deal with us. They would do everything through us and we would just outsource that SOW to the third party.
Got it. So it's almost like, and I think this makes sense. the more and more solutions there are,
Yeah.
like you can't rely on like the big SIs to
No,
be any good,
no, you're not going to
good
get the
at what you
attention,
do.
right? Because they're too busy implementing Microsoft and Amazon and Google technologies. They're not going to have time for your company, right? This is why I specifically said boutique SIs, because they have an opinionated DevOps, framework and an architecture, and your job is to get into that architecture with them, or that blueprint, if you will. And then when they go and sell their value-added services, they're including your technology as part of that.
Love it. Yeah. And I think that there's actually a friend of mine runs a software company or runs a startup called Scope, that actually does, it's like essentially like a marketplace for, it's like an even smaller slice of that where like you can have like an SI cloud, if you will, or not an SI cloud, like the individual, it's almost like I guess it's almost like a sales engineer cloud, right? And you can imagine having these various folks who, because the alternative is like, pulling them off of Upwork or like Elance or something like that and training them up, but then you got to manage them and so on and so forth. So it sounds like once you get to a certain level of scale, doing that with like a boutique SI is the right thing to do. Yeah, it's funny. You kind of see this happening in the revenue tech space as well, where like organizations will become a boutique SI, and then like invariably the solution provider ends up like acquiring them, right?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
like I was just at the
Salesforce,
yeah,
Salesforce
exactly, right.
has pioneered that model, right? So
yeah, who did they? I forgot who they bought, but like I was just at the Sales Love conference in Austin, which was fantastic. Sales Love did a great job. And I met their head of like value engineering, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, you guys are the ones, like, yeah, they got like acquired in whenever it was like a couple of years ago. I think that makes sense. Cool. So I think the like last thing I wanted to kind of touch on here was, how do you, when you got a situation where, you potentially have self-serve going on, you potentially have like these like middle-sized companies, and of course, like you might get self-serve happening in these big enterprise companies. Like having a single rep kind of like trying to serve all those masters is obviously like a single type of rep serving all those masters is pretty tough. What are your recommendations around like, segmenting your team up in such a way that like makes them more effective and make sure that they're like running the same playbook on a recurring basis?
Yeah. So we divide it up by, what we first try to do is, step one is divide the organization up into strategic, enterprise, commercial or mid-market, and then SMB, which we want to be self-serve. And Octopus is coming up with a Stripe integration on our website. So if you've got, we license based on targets. Targets are the number of deployments you need to do. If you need only 25, 50 targets, right, you should just be able to go swipe a credit card online and go buy that, right?
Sure.
And then you've got the commercial mid-market reps. They're the bit more junior reps. They handle companies from 500 to 2,500 employees, and then 2,500 above is enterprise. And then we've got strategic accounts, which are named accounts that are high ARR and high that we know could be a high growth account for us. So that's how we segment it at a first blush. And then take it one level deeper, we've built what's called a propensity to buy model, where we take multiple factors of the number of developers an organization has. Are they cloud native? Are they utilizing container technologies? Are they a .NET shop? What other technologies do they use? What programming languages do they use? How many CSPs are they utilizing? Are they multi-cloud? All of that, and then of course their IT spend and the industry vertical they're in. Those 10 things we look at, and we come up with a scoring model for each of our companies based on that, and then that's what helps our reps identify their A's, B's, and C accounts.
Interesting.
So
and so like if you were to like cite the one or two kind of like most impactful signals there, because that sounds like pretty mature. If somebody wanted to like crawl before they walk, before they run, what would be the way to start?
The way to start would be is what do you look for in your customers that makes them your ideal candidate? You know, everyone talks about ICP, right? Ideal customer profile. For us is, are they utilizing Canadian technologies, right? Are they .NET shop, and are they cloud native, right? So start smaller. So once you have those answers figured out, and sometimes you're gonna have to go and purchase these external lists that give you that data, but you need that data to augment with your customer and prospect list so that you enrich it with that to get a better understanding of, okay, here's how I should be prioritizing my accounts, and here's how I should be going after these customers.
Yeah, I talk about that in a little bit in the prospecting chapter of Founding Sales. Did I send you a copy of Founding Sales? If I haven't, I should send you one.
Yeah, you told me it's on the way. Yeah.
Oh, I did? Okay, awesome. Although,
yeah.
I mean, like, you've been doing sales for 20 years, so like you can use it as a doorstop. It'll be fun.
It's fun.
You can give it to your son to like, you know,
yeah.
to like
oh,
drop
I'm definitely gonna put him into sales. He's already a sales guy.
Well, he closed you on going to the dinosaur
That's
museum
right.
this weekend. So Daddy, are we gonna go to the dinosaur museum on Saturday or Sunday?
That's right.
Like the assumptive baby clothes. Not like, are we going to the museum? It's like, which day are we going on? Right.
Very true.
Yeah, but what I talk about is like thinking, and I think you'll appreciate this as an engineer, is like thinking about the data model of your prospect, right? Like unbundling your prospect into kind of like pieces of metadata. Like with Atrium, it's kind of like, it's like, okay, cool. How many account executives they have? How many SDRs they have? That tells you like the magnitude of like things to be paid attention to, because like Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. The more AEs and SDRs that you have to pay attention to, the harder it is. You need to use like, you know, observability and like metrics in order to manage that. So the more folks there are, the harder it is to do that. The more crystalline the pain is, right? Then you look at like, okay, how well are they potentially solving this internally, like ahead of like actually doing disco,
right?
So usually like a good proxy for that is, you know, the number of sales operations folks that are in place. Like I was talking to one of our customers recommended a buddy of theirs, and so I was taking a disco call earlier. And they've got like 15 account executives. Sorry, they have like 15 SDRs and like 10 account executives and like 1 sales ops person. Like that's a pretty muscular ratio, right? So like, cool. So like, how are you doing from and you could just observe that on LinkedIn, right? From a pre-call planning standpoint, and also a prospect. So like going in, we knew that this was going to be a pretty sick op for us. And like, and then you also kind of know how the call is going to go down too, or like at least like, you know, how you kind of want to guide it to happen. And then like, you never know, you know, you get into the call like, oh, no, like, you know, I'm amazing. I've like built all this like crazy like Tableau things because I'm a certified Tableau person or whatever. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Never heard that one before. But at least like now, like if you can boil down those pieces of metadata, one, it's really important. It's good because then you know what your reps should be looking at from a pre-call planning standpoint. And then 2, you can use it for actual like account discovery out here in the world. Right. And so like our SDR team does that, or actually we have offshore resources doing it for them, where, you know, we're doing account identification and then contact identification within those accounts, which then rolls up to like pieces of metadata, like, cool, this account right here has like 30 account executives, they've got 15 SDRs, and they've got 2 sales ops resources. Okay, great. That's going to be prioritized in these ways, right? Like that's going to be a really great op. We're going to prioritize working that like crazy, right? Fun stuff, right? I think I actually have a blog post on it, which is I think it's like sell like an engineer or something. Let me see if I can. I can find this because I'll drop it into the chat. Well, yeah. Well, Harsh, this was super awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Next week, we're going to have the Paul Butterfield, who's the VP of Global Revenue Enablement from Instructure. So Instructure is like a pretty serious sales organization. I think they have like a few hundred sellers. Actually, it might be like up towards 1,000. So that's going to be next week. So super pumped on that. Harsh, have a great weekend, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. You too. See ya. Bye.
Take care.